With us today is Vincent Edward Festin, a professor at Ateneo de Manila Graduate School of Business, where he teaches corporate governance. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Festin.
Three participants or four participants as I did. All right. Aside from corporate governance, I teach business ethics also in Ateneo Graduate School of Business, and actually I teach it more often than I do corporate governance, no, which is actually related to the story that I'm about to tell. No, the story I'm about to tell is really about I would call a nice problem that I encountered teaching this course. And what do I mean by that? Allow me first to sort of introduce you to the course objectives of corporate governance as we teach it in Ateneo Graduate School of Business. No? This is actually lifted from the Canvas pages of my module, no? Actually from module 0. And you will note it says that at the end of the course, the student should be able to employ concepts and principles of corporate governance in their current work, all right, where they are, okay, not in their future work, but where they are at the moment. Second is to evaluate and assess the condition of a corporation regarding its governance systems. And then finally, identify and apply appropriate action regarding necessary governance structures, policies, and practices. To use a common Ateneo Graduate School of Business phrase will begin with the ending in mind. The final summative assessment is really a group paper and presentation where the students are expected to diagnose and suggest reforms and appropriate policy structures and practices with respect to corporate governance that are actually realistic and doable. And they have to present and defend this paper and this presentation before a panel of corporate governance practitioners, actual people who actually do corporate governance for a living. Right? So where does the problem come in? Well, I used to teach this course, and just for familiarity, in the Ateneo Graduate School of Business, we have several variants to use a term that's in vogue nowadays. No, one of which is the Regis program. It's really an accelerated program for people in middle to senior management levels. No, and the other variant is a typical one, which is really the standard program. And where does the problem start? Well, normally the corporate governance course was designed and developed really for people in the Regis program, no? People who are more advanced in their careers, closer to senior management, unless if not they're already part of senior management or even part of the boards and the governance body. So the challenge that presented itself to me was when I was asked to conduct a class for our standard program, where this would be the profile of the Ateneo Graduate School of Business student in the standard programming, people who are really in their early careers, and their exposure to governance issues is really limited. In many cases, their work is really concentrated mainly in their area of responsibility where they are currently. Now, I found some of them are actually part of corporations as incorporators or directors, but I found out also that some of them are clueless and didn't really know what they were doing as directors. No? And it's as typical of many organic corporations organized. No? It's rare to find a really working board, no, especially at the start. So this was a challenge that presented itself to me, given the summative output and the summative assessment that we had at the end. I felt that I needed to make tweaks and I needed to make adjustments to make the course relevant and value adding. Just very quickly, and for the guidance of everyone in the room, I'm showing to you the definition of corporate governance as defined in SECMC number 19 series of 2016. All right, I'll give you a few seconds to read it on your own. All right. The ancient Greek philosopher Socrates says the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms. No? And I do this often enough, not just in school, but also in public fora and other opportunities where I'm given a chance to talk to boards and other organizations. And when I present this, I always ask people, having read this definition under our administrative issuances, are you more enlightened or are you more confused about the nature of corporate governance? Funny thing is that people always give me the answer that they're more confused. No, I suppose it's because it's so long, all right? Anyway, don't worry, it's a legal definition. I suppose in many ways it's meant to be confusing so that lawyers like me will have business, I suppose. No? But anyway, kidding aside, maybe some of you are lawyers as well. Please don't take offense. I'm just making a joke. No? But the very lengthy definition is supposed to capture the two twin ideas of corporate governance in the sense of addressing the agency problem, where you want to make sure that the directors and the senior management primarily are aware of their fiduciary duties, and so that they avoid also self-interest creeping into their work, and what we call the agency problem. And admittedly, this is where corporate governance started. But many of you, for those of you probably have been following the evolution of corporate governance, not just here in the Philippines, but also abroad, will also note that the other aspect of corporate governance, equally important, is also the application of stakeholder approach, no? And whereby in the past, if shareholders, no, were expecting the board and senior management to create value or add shareholder value, okay, as treated as primus inter pares. Nowadays, of course, the idea is to sort of put other stakeholders on the same footing as shareholders. So this is now the challenge for corporate governance. No? Related to that also is the often overlooked idea that there's a difference between governance and management. No? If to use a sports metaphor, no? I mean, the board as the governing body acts like a coach, no? And it really creates a strategy, no? Ensures that the company is being well run and runs in the right direction, whereas management, of course, runs the company. So they're the ones who execute. Okay, and this is something often overlooked. No? Given also the vast majority of our organizations or corporations are run by also what you would call, well, executive directors. No? So there's often a very blurred distinction, if there's any at all, between governance and management. No? And again, a core idea of our course is understanding that corporate governance is divided into these four governance functions, no, that are subsumed into what I would call the conformance functions and also the performance function. Now, this is also a very important point we want to make in our corporate governance class in the Ateneo Graduate School of Business. You can look at corporate governance as those sets of that set of standards that really forces organizations to adopt all of these conformance and compliance functions. But very few people understand the value adding function, no, in terms of performance, setting the strategy, and all of that. And this is where we sort of wanted to emphasize it, no, not just as a legal compliance measure, but really something that should also aid the business, no, and bring it to its to what we would call sustained profitability. So going back to my problem, knowing that my students were all very junior in the organizations, I had to force myself to make it more experiential. And I guess this is where probably some of the insights can come in. What I did was to actually force the students to go through the process of not incorporating an actual one, but sort of incorporating and imagining their own corporation. So what I did was to split the class into several groups, and each class would start by incorporating their corporation, all right, and after that, no, building their board, coming up with a company website, developing what they call risk statements, talking about emergent issues in terms of sustainability and digitalization, and then going back to what they call the sticky issues of anti-corruption. All right, so group work one, all right, of course, this is alongside other formative assessments like quizzes, you know, and minor papers. You know? But for the group work, I felt it was important to sort of force them to experience things. You know? So they established a stock corporation, and we challenge them: are your purposes properly written up? If your business purpose is this, do you have enough capital? Will it be sufficient? And for the ideas that you have, no, I mean, moving forward. Second part is, I mean, building the board. Okay? And this happens after about a couple of weeks. What's the idea behind building the board? It's really identifying skills, competencies, and knowledge of the board, no? To help them both in their conformance and performance objectives. No? And this is also where we introduce the ideas of diversity, uh, building networks, and all of these things that are often overlooked when you're talking about the board, no? Simply as just being a representative of the shareholders, when you can also use the board again and build it to actually aid your business. Now, the third is where they had a lot of fun because I guess there's a creativity aspect to it. No? But at the minimum, I asked them to develop a website. No? A sitemap would have been enough, like an outline. But they actually went a step ahead and created data sites, no? And mock websites. Now, you can put up anything there, but I think the idea here is that putting up a website and talking about your organization is actually, and a point I drive to them, you're making commitments to the public when you put it out on a website. All right. So it's something that the groups had to discuss thoroughly. All right. What are we prepared to assume in a responsible way so that we can validly put it on our website and make it a commitment to the public? So this is something that they also enjoyed. We had some very interesting critiques of the website, but I think also what was highlighted here was the awesome creativity of the students, no, when it came to the website, right? Now, after the websites and after the responsibilities, we also talked about external matters, no? And one of the emergent and most important ideas in corporate governance nowadays is enterprise risk management. Rather than just talking about it theoretically, I force the students to actually come out with what we call risk statements. It's a way of also assessing their enterprise, their principal risks at an entity level, not just an operational or managerial level. All right. And this was also something that we found very useful and very applicable. And I told them to do it for their fictional companies and also to do it also for their current work, no, after we did some processing. Then we proceeded to, of course, the other branch of risk. No? People understand sustainability, not just in terms of the environment, but also from an entity level. What are the sustainability measures that can be adopted? So here we sidetracked a bit, and that's why I asked them to identify 3 tweaks, some tweaks that they can do right away. I mean, nothing major in terms of hiring an external sustainability consultant or the like, but really moving forward and getting uh, doing some things that are minor but can have some impact. Then we talked about, and very quickly because I have very little time left. All right. It's now said that all companies are tech companies. So we also talked about this emergent idea of data governance. All right. I invite your attention to the final bullet point. No, again, I'm very big on this. No, about corporate responsibility as all being part of corporate governance. No? How can you make use of technology in a very responsible manner, but at the same time also advancing your corporate and your business interests? And then finally, even after talking about this, we talk also about that ever sticky problem of corruption. All right. So having gone and forcing them to go through all of these group processes, no, and forming like a staircase, as it were, we end up with the summative assessment, which is the group paper that I talked to you about, no, where they come out with an analysis and a diagnosis, and then come up with realistic solutions that they have to present to a panel of experts, no, and practitioners. All right. What are the results? The students learned a lot, not just from me. I think they learned a lot from each other. The diverse experiences actually help shape the discussions and the responses in a better way. After also, one of the interesting things is that out of a group of 4 groups, in at least 2 groups, they selected their own corporations to diagnose and recommend solutions. And what was interesting was that at least in 2 groups, they said these were things that were directly adopted right away, okay, by the boards of their corporations, because it saved them money. They didn't have to go hire a consultant, and they were also validated. What was interesting also was that the panelists affirmed the solution to the problem. A couple of them were around for previous classes, and they noted a marked improvement in the output compared to the previous time such an assessment was given. What are my takeaways? Well, I suppose you can doesn't take a genius to figure this out. No? It affirms the principle that people learn best by doing. That's the first. Okay. Second, also is what's nice about teaching in Graduate School of Business is it's people actually are working and already have a laboratory, all right, to work on. So leveraging on collective experiences and knowledge of the students really works, all right, and really does help a lot. The third is this, and I found this very interesting. I noted this a lot. A lot of people, when they were asking, "Sir, this is just a question," and so they're always afraid of worrying about looking stupid. And I put it, I made my a point to encourage and create an environment where stupid questions are welcome. All right, and not to make any other people, not to embarrass anyone for sure. Then finally, external expertise validates and affirms the work done, and it also puts pressure on the students to excel. So that's very quickly my story on my happy problem that I had a couple of terms ago. Thanks for listening. I'm now open for questions. Thank you.
Yes, hello. You can now unmute your mic if you want to ask your questions. Feel free, or you can also send them on the chat box and we will read it out to you for Sir Festin to answer. Thank you. I think we have a question in the chat. Would activities be applicable also to college students taking up legal management?
Oh, that would be interesting. I think to some extent, yes, but as I mentioned in my presentation, a lot of it really was helpful because the students were already working. I'm not exactly sure about the experiences of students taking up legal management, but I suppose some of it would be useful to introduce the concepts, no? And certainly it would probably just require a little bit more hand holding from the professor involved, no? Certainly in terms of incorporating. I did not sort of dwell too much on the legalities for sure. But yes, to some extent, it could still be applicable. I'm sure. No, it might require just a little bit more input, I would say. Thank you.
I think we still have time for more questions. Feel free to use the chat box or you can open up your mic if you want to. Ayun.
If you have any questions also about corporate governance in general, I'd be happy to respond. I mean, not just the course.
Ako, sir, my question po ako.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes po. So, like, with all the changes po happening around how did you think of this and how did you like really adapt to all the things that are happening? How did you adapt your course for the online setup?
The truth is corporate governance is not the. I mean, it's not the most interesting subject, especially if you're not involved in let's say, the compliance, governance, or ethics function in your organization. No? I mean, or let's say you're not part of a board of directors. So that's why I felt that it was necessary to make it more experiential by doing that, no, by coming up with the fictional companies, so the people will actually put themselves in the shoes of either the incorporators or the directors. No? So in a way, that was an adjustment that I had to make, especially since a lot of the work was done online. Uh, the students had to also have some space in between classes to meet and to discuss. So I was very patient about the output. We had to test everything. We had to be very open about we call this deadlines, in the sense of, I mean, some of the work for me, it was more of the process rather than the output. For the formative assessment. So for me, that was the emphasis really. I think that was the bigger question. So a little bit of flexibility so that we can exhaust all of the discussions for each level of the scaffolding, as it were. Okay, what are the current global trends in corporate governance? So very interesting. All right. One is, I think, as I mentioned a while ago, corporate governance started off again with the idea of the agency problem, no? Where people turn their backs on their fiduciary duties and actually, create what you call the agency problem. No? A lot of the corporate governance work has been devoted to that. All right, but you will note very recently, as our definition of corporate governance under the Securities and Exchange Commission's SEC MC 16 states, now there's an equal emphasis now given to stakeholders. So that's the first trend. No? People are now aware of that. And if you'll notice, a lot of the trends, no? For example, ESG, environment, social, and governance practices are now given a lot of attention. That's all part of the trends in corporate governance. In the past, risk management was largely limited to finance, no? But now risk management is an entity level matter that is really infused or folded into the idea of strategy formulation. That's another corporate governance idea. The third is also, if you're talking about a global trend, I think there's increased shareholder activism, not as much here in the Philippines as it is in jurisdictions where equity and shareholdings are diffused. But there will come a time, no, especially if the PSE were to have its way, no, I mean, we'd have more diffused share ownership, then that's something that's going to happen here, no, and there are already signs of that happening. What else? I think there is also better attention paid to what we would call the prevention of abusive related party transactions. These are also corporate governance trends that are hot button. Of course, aside from the idea, of course, of sustainability, corporate sustainability and corporate responsibility, beyond the traditional idea of CSR, these are also developments in corporate governance, for sure. I hope that's a lot, actually. Other questions?
Sir, I have a question.
Yes, go
So,
ahead.
you gave many systems that they can apply and many activities. What do you think is the most important activity that should be implemented right now in our current situation?
Wow. Well, I think no. From pedagogical standpoint, I think it's always to it's always to meet the students where they are. For me, I spent a lot of time parang finding out the contexts in which they find themselves in. So ano bang alam nyo sa corporate governance? Ano bang nararanasan nyo? And very few of them, and that's where I started out. No? Kasi in my class, at least in this last one that I'm talking about, a couple of them were actually already serving as trustees or directors, no, in foundations. So that was a good start. But everyone else was not. So parang for me, it was meeting the students where they were. I think that's basic. And I think parang ano ba alam nyo? So we'll start from there. And actually nga, I mean, the trouble is also a lot of people have many misconceptions about corporations. No, so a lot of that I had to also sort of disabuse them. No, so part of the class was sort of correcting a lot of misconceptions about corporations and corporate governance in general, especially since we also have a new law called the Revised Corporation Code. So that also introduced a lot of new things that had to sort of, I don't know, that had to be explained and introduced to the students. So, but if you're to ask me what's the most important activity, it's to find out where the students are. What do they know? All right, and from there create sufficient launchpad for which to drive the rest of the activities.
Ayan. I think we have room for one more question. If anyone still wants to ask anything.
I hope I made sense.
Ayun, I think we have no more questions. Sir Festin, do you have anything else you want to say before our session officially ends?
Oh, there's a question here. How present are the women in the
I'm sorry.
boards in our country? That's a
Sorry.
nice question. Diversity in boards is an issue also, no, and a growing trend. We happen to conduct research, no, the Ateneo Graduate School of Business conducted research with the Institute of Corporate Directors about 2 years ago. We found out that among the publicly listed corporations, only 12% of the board seats are actually occupied by women. All right, so that's an interesting statistic. When correspondingly, we found out that about 60% of management positions are held by women. All right. So pagdating sa board, parang may funneling. All right. And that's an interesting thing to study further. No? Bakit the glass ceiling, as we call it, is still very present in our boards. No? But that's a reality. And that's something that we hopefully can also break. No? Introduce more diversity in terms of gender. I would say ethnicity. I would also say age and experience are also good factors to consider, no, in mixing up your board. Yeah. Okay. Oops.
All right. I think we only have a few minutes left before the day and the session officially ends. So, Christine, do you have anything else you want or any message you want to say to
Oh, well,
our audience?
if any of you are interested to learn more about corporate governance, I'm part of the leadership of an organization of corporate governance, ethics, and compliance professionals in the country called GGAP, or the Good Governance Advocates and Practitioners of the Philippines. You can just Google us, no, but goodgovernancefilippines.org. And if you're interested to find out more about corporate governance, one of the biggest things about our organization is the willingness of its members to share. All right, so please, if you can, I'll just look for GGAP or Good Governance Philippines.org, and that will open you up to so many other ideas on corporate governance for sure. So thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Festin. Thank you for attending LX 2021 Day 1. If you wish to share your insights, questions, and takeaways, you may post them at gbseal.online/share. See you next Wednesday.